When I was first asked to come and speak at this particular platform, I honestly had no idea why on earth they invited me. I really know nothing about tech. I honestly don't. I'm still trying. I bought an Apple Watch with the attempt to enter into the tech world. And I don't use it. It's basically a watch I must charge. I don't understand why I'm going to charge it. And every morning I'm picking it up, trying to put it on, and it's not charged. Fuck it. And I put it on the side. So there's this $800 piece of thing right on my table. I've not even worn it once. And I'm horribly resistant to technology. So this morning, and I was still putting together slides, right? Because a lot of my work primarily is in the area of empathy, emotion, people. And in my world, it has nothing to do with tech. Right? And it's strange because I decided to come really early in the morning from 10 a.m. and listen to God knows how many talks, right? Just to hopefully learn something. Like frantically learn, right? I'll come here and wing it right now. And that's what I did. I listened, and I actually came with a pretty strong defense, emotional defense. Like, oh my God, I'm just going to die right now. And I sat at the back, right? And it was really interesting because somewhere by the second speaker and third speaker, and it was strange because I came in with this particular assessment just to think that if we're talking about smart city in Singapore, why are there so many expatriates or foreigners coming in and speaking about that? And I think Alexandra put it perfectly there, that in context, right, it seems as if actually that it would be something which is really quite different. And then I think you pointed out to say that you wouldn't actually have a empathy towards this context. But in my listening today, I found over here that actually you guys had immense empathy. And a lot of the technological struggles or challenges that we go through actually are more universal than we think. And I was able to relate to a lot of the talks today. And they did give me itself a bit of confidence and grounding to say, maybe I do have something to offer. Maybe, I don't know, we'll see. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk about this particular emotional experience around the whole idea of permission, right? And it's an important part itself, right, I think, of technology because even if you're looking at any form of intervention, so let's say, if, for example, you are living in a flat and you know that somewhere in terms of your neighborhood, okay, or maybe your neighbor, there's always a commotion coming out from the house, right? Clearly someone there is not being treated well. Clearly itself, right, there's maybe some level of violence there. And the whole question we ask ourselves is, at what point in time do we intervene? Right? At what point in time do we have the permission to somehow intervene? And for the longest time, I've always felt, right, that technology actually is a very interventionist thing. It comes in, it's pretty intrusive, right? And it comes into a society and it goes, okay, I know what to do here, right? And I ask myself the question, how do you have the permission to come in? And the second question is that even if you are in, how do I have the permission to somehow use you? Right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell two stories that will be seemingly unrelated to technology. But I was preparing this for the past week or so. I think what's been happening is that I began to think through how does a person like me, right, who is completely resistant to technology, really relate towards it. And there were two stories that jumped out for me. Right? So I grew up in, or at least I was born into an extremely wealthy family. Right? My grandfather actually was a shipping tycoon. He came from China, and he was a coolie in Singapore. So for those of you who are foreigners, a coolie is like a laborer, right? And when he came in himself as a coolie, true story, he was walking past a river one day, right, at the end of work, and he saw a man drowning. So he jumped into this river, right, and saved this particular man, right, to pull the man to the shore. And this particular man, right, turned out to be a man called Ibn Sutowo, who was the right-hand man of Suharto during Suharto's regime, right, during that point in time. And Suharto's, this man called Ibn Sutowo was extremely grateful to my grandpa and brought him over to Indonesia and made him a shipping tycoon. Right. Like, okay, sure. What the hell, right? So here are the first few tankers, go. So, yeah, that's why I believe in corruption. So, But this was happening over here, and he became basically this big shipping tycoon that was basically helping all the early oil trade, commodities trade between Singapore and Indonesia. And he came to a place over here where I was born into that particular family. And I never really understood wealth because my mom never ever made it an issue. She didn't talk about it, right? But you could more or less experience it. So there were strange times over here where even during Chinese New Year, we would go and visit the Prime Minister for Bai Nian. Right, this is to pay our respects, right, during Chinese New Year. I remember there was one particular incident, right, that was happening over there that it was a event that struck me very deeply. I was actually, in Singapore terms over here, actually I was never really a strong student. I was a C and D student most of the way, right? In Singapore, it's a no-no, right? You don't do things like that. So I've never really gotten an A before, whatever the case is. I was genuinely struggling, and I repeated both my O-levels as well as my A-levels. So in Singapore, I'm called a repeat student, right? Two-time repeat student. But my sister, the disgusting person that she is the other type, right? So she went to RGPS, RGS, RJC, Cambridge, then Harvard. For the foreigners, it's basically disgusting elite school to disgusting elite school to disgusting elite school to disgusting elite school. And basically, she was all the way there, and she was one of these overseas merit scholars. And what happened over here was that, she was doing extremely well. But my sister and I were pretty close. But it's one particular day, right, it was Chinese New Year, second day, and my grandpa brought us in to visit the Prime Minister, right? And we were there basically just to Bai Nian. And this is the first time we were there. And being brought in, and what happens is my father then introduced both of us, right? And he turned to my sister first, and he said, over here, this is my daughter, she's from Cambridge, right? This is my son, he is tall, right? Yeah. And after doing that over here, I saw this, and my sister immediately, sort of turned. And she looked, and she had been, with me for the past maybe 8 years or so, and she's become very, very sensitive to the fact that we come from very different academic streams, right? And when my dad said that, she immediately froze, right? And she was going, oh my God, right? And when we left the house that day and we got into the car, my sister turned to me, right? And she said, God, I promise you, okay, I will never have ever said that. I don't think we are different, right? I always have seen us as the same, right? You are my brother. And I went, fuck you. No, I really did. She went over there, and she just turned. And I remember, so I turned around, I didn't want to talk to her. And there were these strong emotions, right, that came. And these emotions itself, right, I want you to begin to just pull through. That it really began, right, with first a growing degree of resentment. Why am I part of this whole Singapore education system, right? The second thing itself that came about itself was a deep amount of sadness from her part as well as my part, because we felt that we were being more and more separated along the way. And in the car, the attempt itself for her was to bridge that gap, right, for us to come together again. But I responded with apathy, right, simply because I didn't think we could bridge that gap. And for the next, I think after that incident, it was a good 6 years, I didn't talk to my sister. Yeah, it was nothing of her doing, I just didn't talk to her, right? And it was until much, much later in life that I begin to actually redraw those particular lines, right? And say, maybe we aren't so different. That could be a possible metaphor or parable for what technology could do to us. There was a similar incident that was happening, right? And this was actually a time where, so even though I was growing up in this particular family, my mom insisted that we try to grow up in as humble a background as possible. So she took us out actually of this particular big fat house, and she bought her own 3-room HDB flat, right? So I had grown up basically in a 3-room HDB flat, and in doing so over here, right, in that particular raising, she was like typical most of the parents. And I don't remember whether you were part of the same generation, but I was part of the generation where personal computers were not part of an everyday household item yet, right? So she would buy the Britannica Encyclopedia. That would sit at home before the computer came, right? And basically it was this big pride, right, that she just had to buy for her children. But when the first personal computer came into our own home, right, I remember seeing on her face a huge amount of pride in that she managed in her own way to afford a computer, bring it home, and have her children then begin to play, right? And in doing so, I remember sitting down, right, using that particular computer, right? And in doing so over here, I remember one evening she came into my room and she says, "Will you teach me how to use it?" Right? And I, of course, herself, right, was pretty excited by this because my mom was actually interested in what she was doing. And she belonged to a generation that really didn't know how to use it. So she sat down, right, and I said, "Okay, right, start." And she just stared at it for a while, right, not knowing where the on button was, whatever the case was there. So I turned it on for her, and I asked her to interact with the screen. And she took the mouse and picked it up, and she put the mouse on the screen. Right? And she then began to move the thing around. And I remember at a point in time, I was young, at 14, and I just couldn't stop laughing. I really couldn't. It's like tears coming down, right? And my mom felt a huge amount of embarrassment at the point in time. Right? A huge amount of embarrassment. After that, what happened was that she felt that she didn't want to use it anymore, and then she stepped out, right, from the incident. And I remember my response, right, was not compassion. My response was contempt, right? It was, "Mom, it's a mouse. You don't use a mouse." Right? And it was that kind of language. "You don't know how to use a mouse?" And the truth is, she didn't know how to use a mouse. Yeah, she really didn't. And it moved to this space over here where, after a while, I think there was not just embarrassment, but there was a certain humiliation on her part. Till today, my mom still refuses to touch the computer. She's already 62 years old, right? She's senior director of the Wilmer Group, the ones that burn all the palm trees over there. Yeah, she's the reason why we have haze. But in doing so over here, she's senior director and she can't use the computer. Refuses to touch it. And she won't engage with the technological world because there's really quite a bit of fear in that. Part of it was caused by me. So if you take a look itself, right, at the range of emotions you're looking at here. And I take this itself to the emotional level because a lot of what we're talking about is basically technology. We talk about themes, we talk about maybe security. But behind that itself, right, there's a human being who's actually experiencing this particular technology, right? And experiencing itself in a way that these particular emotions, I'm not even running a dystopia here, right? But I'm saying itself, these are possible emotions that really could come about, right? And in doing so, there's one core narrative, right, behind these particular emotions. That I don't want to be part of this. There's a separation between what is it you're doing and what is it we're doing. And it was strange because in the first invite to come to this particular conference and being able to share, I really felt that underlying everything, that was my narrative inside. Smart nation, what has that got to do with me? Right? And it was interesting over here because if you look at it, and we ask the question, how can we be active participants, right, in the development of my own smart nation when really I'm not very smart myself? Right? And the language in itself, and it's the point that you guys were raising over here, the whole language around that, right, the smart nation, for a nation or a context or a cultural context, right, that is as meritocratic and as unfortunately as stratified as we are, right, I'm not so sure the word smart really serves everybody, right? I don't know, today, when I was sitting in the back, I felt actually increasingly small. There was a lot of jargon that people were using that I really could not understand. I don't know what an API is. What is it? Never mind, I don't care. So that's it. I mean, all these techniques over there, I said, but I don't get what it is, right? And I'm just thinking over here, what has this got to do with me? And in doing so over here, it's interesting because I genuinely do want to participate. And I want to participate because a smart nation is no longer talking about a smart office. A smart nation is so pervasive, I can't even avoid it if I want to. It's not as if itself I can basically, go to my office, right, be basically all techie, then come home, right, and I can rest in my nice candlelight. I can't. I can't avoid it because basically you're bringing it everywhere, right? And when I last night was doing all the research, I was watching all the IDA videos, I noticed that it was permeating to everything, my jogging, my diet, my, As I was doing this over here, I was just thinking, I can't run from this, even if I wanted to. My mom had the option to run. She could still avoid it, right there. But a smart nation, for someone itself who was completely computer illiterate, right, it actually made me feel very small. So, if we wanted to begin to shift this narrative, right, and move from a place, right, not so much of, exclusion, right, but really start looking at ownership. And I think this is the most beautiful landing point that we really can bring to plant this into. That people like my mom or myself, right, can look at a smart nation and actually hold ownership over it. And the narrative behind ownership, right, essentially is that this is mine. Right? I think I shared this in a previous time that I was speaking here, that when I became a father, it took me some time before I looked at my daughter and I said, she is mine, and I will participate in her life. It took me some time to shift in the identity. But in the same way over here, I think, right, we need, at least in terms of the population for Singapore, if we are going to be as porous as we are, and it's going to be as fast as we are, and bring this smart nation into vision, and if I can trust my government well enough, it will be within the next 10 years, right? Then there's a lot of work to be done. Not just on a top-down level, but on a bottom-up level. Communities need to be ready for this, right? And in doing so over here, right, I don't think many of them will hold that particular idea, that I'm not just a consumer of technology, I actually am also part of the entire process. Right. So if there are three things, right, that will start looking around, how do we go about building up ownership, right? I would suggest to yourself that these are the three things, okay? The three levels, right, around building up ownership, and this is basically from a lot of the emotional work that we do, is that when we're working towards anybody or any organization that wants to somehow build ownership among their own staff or people, you'll find that actually there are three main narratives that get in the way, right? The first narrative that gets in the way is just simply say that, what has this got to do with me? This is not my business, right? So this is an identity level narrative, right? So my grandpa could have very easily passed that particular river, right? Looked at this man drowning and gone, okay, nothing to do with me, right? Or he could have said, right, hey, we're both human beings, right? Or you're going to give me a shipping fleet, right? And then jump in over there and then say, they could have been over here, but in doing so, there is part of a narrative over here that says, hey, right, we can't necessarily get involved. So the thing about this over here is that I don't think a smart nation, right, and I think those wonderful slides just now, don't talk about just smart nations, but smart citizens, right? And whether the nature of basically the smart citizen, right, is something which is developed. But we've got to be clear, it's not here right now. I'm not even sure whether we're very good citizens right now. I think Singapore's are great consumers, but we're citizens. But in doing so, there's identity level work that must be done. The second thing that must be done over here is the idea of ability. Can I or can I not? That's a lot of what I'm struggling with and what my mom is struggling with. We don't have the language, we don't have the capability. And if you're telling me to code, and it's really interesting because even my daughter, right, she's 7, she came, like, today we learned how to code. What is she talking about, right? And she did, right? Her kindergartens are just teaching her how to actually do little things with little lights. I don't know what she's talking about, but I learn how to code. And I can feel as alienated as, wow, I suddenly have a lot of empathy for my mom. You should know how to use the mouse, right? Yeah, but in doing so over here, that ability, right, there's a big gap that's there. And the permission, I think, is exactly the same thing. That even for Singapore right now, we don't really actually have the social spaces that say that should be a permission to be part of a collaborative process. Part of the efficiency that we have built in Singapore is the fact that it's mostly top-down implementation, right, mostly. And I don't know, there's a huge amount of trust. Usually they deliver a damn good job. Yeah, but it doesn't mean that we've been part of the collaborative process. Usually it's very inefficient, right? Like marriages, So, shut up and clean the kitchen, yeah. So and if you're doing this over here, right, you come to a place where there needs to be that permission to say, hey, there genuinely is an invitation in this, right? Come in, right, talk about it, right? And I would love to hear your opinion. So, this is a complete stretch out from nowhere itself, and I don't think I've entirely done the groundwork, right, to put this as a real idea that I'm confident to sit behind. But a lot of my own work right now has come to a place where I've stopped saying that government should be doing things. I genuinely believe over here that given what we have and the amount of privilege that Singapore has right now, it is time for, Singaporean citizens to start doing things themselves, right? Becoming better citizens. And in doing so over here, I don't think that it comes to this place where building up that ability, that permission, that narrative is entirely the job of the IDA. For crying out loud, it's not. Yeah, it is the job of people like myself, right? To come in and build the necessary classrooms, modules, experiences, right, that are needed, right, to have this smart nation really come alive. So in doing so over here, I think permission is a lot about whether or not smart spaces can be created within basketball courts or the neighborhood park. Something itself which is clearly public, that I can walk into, not too intrusive yet, but I sort of stumble upon and go, oh, that's so interesting, and begin to actually use that space there. And on an experiential level, right, begin to feel that actually I do have permission to begin to interact with it. But that something should be subtle, right, so that I can just explore, right, and have a conversation with it. I think exactly itself as what Cheryl was talking about. On identity level, I do think that there needs to be a lot more community conversations around how the smart nation itself is, we do need a stake in it, genuine stake. That is not just a right, it is also a responsibility. Right? And if we start becoming entitled to the way we are with our transport systems, I think we're going to be in trouble. Right? Where basically, oh God, again, our Wi-Fi network's not working, damn government. I don't think serves us. Right? And I think there's an equal responsibility that if you're going to take on this smart nation and it will start involving all the security and surveillance issues and things like that that come in, then we jolly well be responsible for what's about to come. Right? Because I don't think we can look at 20 years later and be a victim of basically the big brother that has come in and controlled us. Right that way. And these conversations need to start. Ability is the good news. Singapore's a freaking genius in this shit, right? So I really don't think itself we're going to struggle with these particular things. So when it comes to basically the contextual workshops or the classes, right, to allow each demographic or things like that, right, I think we'll probably do that pretty well. If anything, it's just execution or implementation that we're going to struggle with a bit. But I think to close off, right, the entire discussion, I do want to say this. The smart nation and fast technological capabilities, understandably, is going to be a top-down implementation. Right? But it doesn't mean itself like this excludes bottom-up citizenry. Right? It really doesn't. And I would love the narrative, right, for us to just say that of course I can play a part. It would be my absolute pleasure. Right? Okay, thank you.